Okay, so we will start, and then we have 1 minute, and I will introduce Professor Bailey. 15 people. So next week we will have Nigel Bigger from, I think, Oxford, to talk about colonialism. He just published a book about colonialism. So, okay, just people are still joining, so let me wait 1 more minute, and I'll introduce Michael. Okay, so it's 10:30, so it's time to start. Okay, so welcome back to the Stanford Classical Liberalism series. I am Ivan Marinovich, a professor of accounting at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Today, we have the privilege to have a great speaker, Professor Michael Bailey from Northwestern University. He's a professor of psychology and has served as the chair of the psychology department at Northwestern University. He is widely recognized for his research and writings on human sexuality, gender identity, and sexual orientation. He's published over a dozen articles in renowned psychology journals. In 2003, he authored a highly acclaimed book entitled The Man Who Would Be Queen, which sparked both praise and vehement criticism. Unfortunately, this resulted in personal attacks directed towards him, and even today, there are websites solely dedicated to maligning his reputation. More recently, Professor Bailey encountered controversy when one of his papers on gender dysphoria was retracted by Springer due to pressure from activists. As this forum holds a keen interest in academic freedom and open inquiry, we believe it is essential to provide a platform for Michael to discuss his ideas and perhaps more crucially, delve into the research supporting them. So without further ado, welcome, Professor Bailey.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Although the title on this slide is accurate mostly, I would perhaps add a subtitle, which would be interesting things that you may not know about transgender and dysphoria that you need to.
All right, it's fine, because I'll just mute it. Okay, what's happening?
Yeah, I have little
Shit,
bit.
what's
That's
happening?
it.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right. So again, subtitle might be interesting and important things that you may not know about gender dysphoria and transgender that you need to in order to have sufficiently informed opinions about controversies and policy. Okay, so I've been studying this stuff for a long time, well over 20 years. And it is remarkable how rapidly times have changed. And comparing the times before the year 2000, when I first got into these topics, and since about 2015, there's been a change of focus from adults, which is what it was before, to children and adolescents, which is what it is now, especially adolescents, and especially adolescent girls, who are the primary individuals who have rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is what our retracted article was about. Parents have changed. Back in the old days, parents who had a child who appeared to have gender dysphoria did not want their child to transition and tried to get help to prevent that outcome. Now, in contrast, many parents help their children transition at young ages. Words and definitions change back in the ancient period before 2000. The word transsexual was the most common word used to describe individuals who wanted to change their sex. Now it seems like the words that are allowed change weekly. I suppose the most common word is transgender. Definitions also have changed, mostly not because we've learned anything, but because people are policing words and definitions. I don't do that, so I will use words that I think are most clear, and those often have a history. Prevalences of transgender phenomena may well have increased. We don't have great data on that. We do have some surveys suggesting that people have changed their pronouns at high rates, but whether that has important implications for the way they live their lives otherwise, we don't know. Who is considered an expert has also changed. Back in the ancient days, before 2000, experts tended to be people who'd studied this for a living, published authors, and now the new experts tend to be clinicians who all the people on this slide are well known now, and they're all identified as pro-transition clinicians. And I consider them activists as well. So the main ideas that I'll be talking about today concern the fact that there are three distinct kinds of gender dysphoria. And most people, in fact, don't know that. And I'm going to be telling you about the three different kinds, what we know about them, and how they differ among each other. This blog from 2017, Gender Dysphoria is Not One Thing, is, if you find this talk sufficiently interesting, you want to share the ideas, this is a good thing that you can first reread the basic ideas and share with others. Okay, the three types of gender dysphoria that I'll be talking about are childhood-onset gender dysphoria, autogynephilic gender dysphoria, and rapid onset gender dysphoria. Starting with childhood onset gender dysphoria, this occurs in both sexes, boys and girls. The onset is before puberty, way before puberty. In fact, I would say if your child did not show signs of gender dysphoria before the age of 6, your child did not have childhood onset gender dysphoria. Sometimes this can appear before the age of 2. There are obvious signs, including gender nonconformity, that is behaving like the other sex, like the little boy on the left is dressed as a girl. The girl on the right is presenting in a very masculine way. The natal female on your right has in fact transitioned to become a trans male. I don't know what's happened to the little boy. So in the old days, as I said, parents discouraged persistence. Persistence meaning staying gender dysphoric until transition. The opposite of persistence is desistance, and parents in the old days preferred desistance. There were high desistance rates by early adolescence. The literature that we have, and this tended to be carefully collected data at specialized clinics treating childhood onset gender dysphoria. Those data suggested that perhaps 80 to 90% of child onset cases desisted by early adolescence. That means that they no longer wanted to change their sex. However, those cases that did not desist were very likely to transition. In the old days, transition occurred at the earliest in young adulthood, and that consisted of medical transition, including surgery, sex reassignment surgery, and then, of course, the necessity of permanent hormones. There were very low rates of regrets, suggesting that people were mostly satisfied with transition, the few who did transition. And childhood onset gender dysphoria is strongly associated with same-sex attraction in adulthood. By that, I mean little boys who wanted to be girls and became trans women were attracted in adulthood to men. Little girls who were very masculine and wanted to become men in adulthood were attracted to women. So, as I said, nowadays, oh no, sorry, hold on just a second. Okay. Nowadays, things have changed. Many parents encourage transition, and they facilitate this by allowing their young children to socially transition. They let their little feminine boys live as girls, and their very masculine girls live as boys and go to school that way, and so on. We have now the treatment of hormone blockers at the beginning of puberty to prevent cross-sex maturation. I'm sorry, not cross, to prevent sexual maturation. So a little boy given hormone blockers will not have highly masculinized face, will not develop a lot of body hair, and so on. This is followed by cross-sex hormones, that is, for example, perhaps estrogen for natal males and testosterone for natal females, and then gender-affirming surgery as soon as possible. And this can sometimes occur before the age of adulthood. This is one of the most famous child-onset male-to-female transsexuals, known as Jazz Jennings. I believe Jazz was named. Jaron, on the two left-hand pictures, are Jaron, Jazz as a boy. Jazz Jennings' parents allowed her to transition socially, I think by the age of 5. And she has had all of the medical treatments, from blockers to cross-sex hormones to sex reassignment surgery. And now she's a young adult. I think she's at Harvard, or about to attend Harvard. And her parents and she were on a reality TV show for several years. I think it continues, in fact, which is a very different approach than the old days, when families tended probably to be ashamed of their gender dysphoric children, which I certainly don't think was good. This is Jazz Jennings today, And I put this slide on here to remind me to tell you that Jazz does not appear to be a perfectly happy person to date. She has had pretty important medical complications associated with her transition. For example, her sexual functioning, she has never had an orgasm, and that is probably related to hormone blockers and perhaps the surgery as well. She had to have several additional surgeries to correct complications for her genital surgery. She seems, she's depressed. And so now we don't really know to what extent that has to do with her transition, but it might. So an important issue with respect to this type is deciding what is best. There is no doubt that as a young boy, Jaron, who became Jazz, wanted with all his heart, later her heart, to transition. And her parents made her very happy by allowing this. There is also no doubt in my mind that Jazz will never express regrets. She will never say, I wish that hadn't happened. I wish I were still a boy. Does that mean it was a success? I think that the best way to decide these things, and it's not straightforward, I don't know how to do it, but the best way to think about it is in terms of counterfactuals. Had Jazz never transitioned, she would probably be a young gay man. And she would have avoided surgical complications and the lifetime need of hormones. She almost certainly would have experienced orgasm. Whether she would be depressed or not, I don't know. The man in this picture is Ken Zucker, who is a very important
Hi, this is Tom Connie.
he's a very important scientist of gender dysphoria, especially childhood and adolescent gender dysphoria, as well as a sex therapist. When the world started to change, Zucker was fired from his position at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, where he had established one of the world's leading clinics and research centers for childhood gender dysphoria. He's also the editor of Archives of Sexual Behavior, who accepted our article, the now retracted paper. I should say Zucker became unpopular among trans activists because he believes that it is better to treat gender dysphoric children with talk therapy and to avoid, if one can, transition. And this has led him to be characterized as a conversion therapist. I think that that's not true. The conversion therapy is religious and ideologically motivated therapy to that devalues homosexual outcomes. Okay, the second kind of gender dysphoria I'll discuss is autogynephilic gender dysphoria. Autogynephilia is a natal male's sexual arousal by the fantasy of being or the act of imitating a woman. It can be thought of as an internalized sexual attraction, and I'll review that later. it is, I think, a paraphilia. I will review that later. It can be thought of as a rarish sexual orientation that occurs in up to 3% of natal males. And it is not, those of you who've heard of it, or you may start thinking about it, it is not narcissism, which it has often been assumed to be. Narcissism is undue high self-regard. Autogynephilia is sexual arousal by the idea of being a woman. Those are two different things. So who is autogynephilic? The following groups are, according to the science that I believe, heterosexual male cross-dressers, or also known as transvestites, transgender natal males who are not exclusively male attracted, and I'll discuss that momentarily. Transgender natal males who have been heterosexually married or by strong assumption autogynephilic. And the last thing here is most controversial. We can discuss more later if you want. I think that many or even most natal males with apparent rapid onset gender dysphoria may be autogynephilic. So this is the classic presentation associated with transvestic fetishism, which is the version of autogynephilia that is in the DSM, the psychiatric diagnostic book. These are some well-known heterosexual transsexuals. I don't think most of them have ever mentioned autogynephilia, but again, by the classification system that I believe is well supported, I would certainly wager that all of these are autogynephilic. This is a new group, autogynephilic youth transitioners. I know the one on the left through Twitter, she's a Twitter follower of mine, and the one on the right is a friend of hers who gave her permission to share pictures. These are both self-identified autogynephilic transgender women. Both of them have been receiving medical treatment in the form of hormones. I don't think either has had surgery, but the one on the left, I think that picture is from her late teens. She's now in her early 20s, and similar age for the other one. So autogynephilic gender dysphoria happens to a subset, not all, of persons with autogynephilia. Autogynephilia happens only in males. The onset of autogynephilia is early adolescence, and the typical onset occurs when a natal male somehow discovers, certainly never taught, but somehow discovers on his own that it is sexually exciting for him to put on girls' or women's clothing, especially lingerie, his mother's panties and a bra, for example, look at himself in the mirror and masturbate. This is not at all obvious to parents. These boys do not tell their parents, hey, mom, guess what I discovered is really exciting. As I said, sometimes autogynephilia does not lead to gender dysphoria. And the onset of autogynephilic gender dysphoria can be much later, after adolescence. What causes autogynephilia? Before I say more, I'll just say nobody knows. Nobody knows, though we have some ideas. I have a vague idea that perhaps I'll tell you, but this is a common assertion these days that Autogynephilia is acquired by consumption of certain kinds of pornography, especially something that is new on the scene. It's called sissy hypno porn, which I know a little bit about, have never really watched, and it doesn't really matter for my present purpose that you understand much about it, just that you understand that the assertion that seeing this pornography is turning boys autogynephilic, I think that's false. These are old school pornography, or at least erotic fiction, that were around well before an active internet. And they have the same themes that is shown as featured in sissy hypno porn. And they were also appealing to autogynephilic persons back before the internet. Nothing has really changed except for the technology. I believe that pornography does not cause male sexuality, including autogynephilia. Rather, it reveals it. Autogynephilic youth are discovering and watching sissy hypno porn on the internet because it appeals to them. They are not becoming autogynephilic because of it. What would be best for autogynephilic persons? Well, I think that the first thing that I would think about is knowledge about autogynephilia, because autogynephilia is in fact a puzzling phenomenon, even for persons who have it. And then I don't know what else to advise them. For example, I don't know whether we should be advising them not to transition or to transition more often, to do it earlier or later. We don't know. Autogynephilia has not been researched as much as it should be. And here's one reason. Autogynephilia is quite controversial, and I'm a case history of that. I wrote this book and published in 2003 and had a long controversy about it. The controversy was launched by this person, Lynn Conway, who's a very distinguished and important and brilliant electrical engineer from the University of Michigan. I'm going to be showing you several kind of pieces of text that I'm not going to read to you. I want you to read to yourself and quickly. So here's the first one. I'll give you a few seconds. Read that.
Already, I read it long ago, Michael.
Yeah. This is part of Lynn Conway's very extensive website devoted to me and my book. And I encourage anybody interested to go through there and read all about what a bad and evil person I am, according to them. This is a main collaborator of Lynn Conway on the left, Andrea James, who is, unlike Conway, not a distinguished person. I don't really know what she is. She's a media person. And on the right is something that she made using pictures of my children and put that prominently on her website. And I have the full version. If anybody is interested, I'll send it to you. And I provide this not to make you feel sorry for me or my children, we're all fine, but to give you a sense of what Andrea James is like. And she is still pursuing people whose ideas she doesn't like and making web pages about them. She still updates web pages about ex-girlfriends and friends of mine. And since I'm talking to you at Stanford, I'll include this op-ed from the Stanford Daily a little over 20 years ago when I gave a talk at the psychology department there. And this op-ed was written by Joan Roughgarden, who's a trans woman who was at Stanford. I don't know if she still is, but I believe this was related to the same controversy. This book by Alice Drager contains several chapters about this controversy. And along with reading Lynn Conway's website, and sure, go ahead and read Andrea James too, and anybody else who thinks that I did wrong, just please do read this too before making up your mind. Okay, what is the problem with discussing autogynephilia rationally? What caused this controversy? And I think that there are two perhaps related problems. One is the problem of shame, and that is that many autogynephilic transsexuals are deeply ashamed of autogynephilia. I find this unfortunate. I'm not ashamed of them. I think autogynephilia is a difficult condition, but you know, it's something that we should try to help people to live their best lives with. The other problem, which is, I think, deeper, the Santa problem. It's you know, the problem is that there's really no Santa, and I remember when I was told this by my cousin in childhood, I was really upset. And the analogous fact is that autogynephilic trans women are really not like natal women. They're natal males with this unusual sexuality that makes them long to be women. But some of them experience this information as a narcissistic injury and try to injure others. I believe those are the two main reasons why autogynephilia is so controversial. I do want to emphasize that it is not me against autogynephilic trans women. It is me allied with open and honest autogynephilic trans women. And here's an example of an email I received by one. Again, please take a few seconds to read that. I have dozens of emails like that, and sometimes I will just reread them. They make me happy. The most important victims of my autogynephilic cancellation are young autogynephilic persons like these, who we can't advise in an educated way about how to best live their lives. Some reasons for hope include the guy on the left there, Kevin Sue, was my PhD student. He's now an assistant professor at Penn State Abington, studying autogynephilia. He's launched a very large long-term study of persons with autogynephilia, in which he wants to see whether he can find patterns that lead to maximized happiness. The book on the right was just published. You can and should get it now on Amazon. On Kindle, I think it's only $8. It is by an autogynephilic man who knows a lot. And this is both has really all the science in a very readable way, but also his insider take. I don't agree with everything Phil says, but I agree with most of it, and it's excellent. So I do want to present some of my own research related to autogynephilia for two reasons. One, if you talk to somebody who doesn't like autogynephilia, they will tend to lead with, oh, that's been debunked. I can assure you that the science of autogynephilia is going strong, and it is, I think, quite solid. And the other reason why I want to present it is because I think it's intrinsically fascinating. My work on autogynephilia and paraphilias over the past decade has been the most scientifically gratifying research that I've ever conducted. So let me just give you a taste of some of the stuff that we're doing. So this is the most common instrument used to measure autogynephilia. It's an 8-item scale, though only 7 of those items are on this slide. And you basically answer yes or no to each of these items. And the one at the bottom, have you ever been sexually aroused by the thought of being a woman? That's kind of the meat of it. The rest of it is sexual arousal by having female attributes like breasts, buttocks, legs, genitals, and so on. So again, your scale score ranges between 0 and 8. So the first data I'll show you, these are not published yet. It's from a survey I did recruiting people on social media. I have lots of interesting Twitter followers. And the question here is, have you ever thought you might be transgender? And the dependent variable is scale scores on the core autogynephilia scales. So starting from the left, the first bar there are people who said, yes, I have thought about that. And also, I'm non-homosexual. To be non-homosexual means that you are not, and these are all men, or natal males. I am not exclusively attracted to men. You can see that that is the group that has quite elevated scores on autogynephilia. That's what the originator of this theory, Ray Blanchard, found in the 1980s, that it was the non-homosexual transgender males who had autogynephilias. The next bar over, these are also people who said, yeah, I have thought maybe I'm transgender, but these are homosexual. These are males who are only attracted to men. They have very low autogynephilia scores, and this is demonstrative of Blanchard's two types theories of male transgender. One type is autogynephilic, the other type is homosexual. And then the third bar are people who just said, no, I've never thought I'm transgender. This result is hugely significant. All of the results that I will show you are at least 4 zeros before the 1 and p-values. Okay, so an objection to autogynephilia, saying that autogynephilia it has an explanatory role in gender dysphoria, or that autogynephilic males are unusual, that they're paraphilic, is to say that, well, women also are autogynephilic. If you talk to women, they also eroticize their own bodies and feel sexy being a woman and so on. And there was a small, not very good study, in my opinion, that found some evidence for that. We last year published this study, How Autogynephilic Are Natal Females. And here's the bottom line. We had 10 samples, 4 autogynephilic male samples. Those are the ones in the red stripes on the left. The blue in the middle are the 4 samples of males without autogynephilia, and the 2 black stripes are natal females. And you can see again, huge differences. Natal females are not autogynephilic, and huge sample. Is autogynephilia a paraphilia? So it is classified as such, but I think that people, there have been activists who have had a good point about the word paraphilia, and that is people are using this, they're even medically, they're using this term, it's in the DSM, and yet they're not making a case that paraphilia is a scientific term. Instead, the activists say paraphilia is a highfalutin word used to stigmatize people with unusual sexualities. I think that scientists have been too slow to try to argue against that position. And I have undertaken a many years research program. I'll show you a result momentarily, to try to get at this. And the question is the term paraphilia, is the concept a natural category, say like mammals, where there's something there that all mammals have in common, that all or most paraphilias have in common, or is it an artificial category, like, say, furniture, which is made by humans to serve certain ends? This is a list of paraphilias beginning with the letter A that one can find in Wikipedia. You can just quickly look over some of those. And this is just the A's. There are over, well over 100 total paraphilias listed there. And the ones in red here are paraphilias that my group has actually collected data on. Okay, so this is a forest plot of the means of an index, a psychometric index that I believe is strongly related to paraphilia. The data here comprises over 6,000 individuals from 22 different samples. Above the line, above the bold line in the middle, are the paraphilic samples and their means. Below are the control groups. And you can see on average that the paraphilic samples are much higher than the controls. The scale, the numbers at the bottom aren't going to mean anything to you, so don't pay attention to them. You can see that autogynephiles have the highest scores on this scale. Now, something that I forgot to mention already, but I think is another objection that I understand by some activists, is that, well, you're not telling us really what paraphilias are. You don't really have any evidence for them, and yet you're putting cross-dressers, autogynephiles, in the same categories as pedophiles. And obviously pedophiles are tremendously stigmatized. Well, on our scale, pedophiles actually are quite low on this paraphilia scale, which is interesting. Autogynephiles are high, and they're up there with the adult babies and diaper lovers and furries and involuntary eunuchs and so on. This paper is also not yet published. We'll be submitting it in the next month or two. So autogynephilia, I understand it as a kind of internalized sexual attraction, and transgender is a form of something called erotic target identity inversions. Anne Lawrence is herself an autogynephilic trans woman who is also a brilliant scientist of autogynephilia and related phenomena. And I love this paper, Clinical and Theoretical Parallels Between Desire for Limb Amputation and Gender Identity Disorder. And in this paper, she draws comparison between men seeking voluntary amputations of healthy limbs. And she shows that just like natal males with autogynephilia, these men, just like natal males with autogynephilia, are sexually attracted to women and essentially invert this attraction to women inside themselves, wanting to create a woman inside themselves. So do men seeking amputations. They are attracted to amputees, and they seek to create an amputee inside themselves, sometimes obtaining amputations, sometimes injuring themselves in ways that require that. The movie Whole is about these voluntary amputees, and it's quite interesting. So this paper is, we just sent in the proofs, and it's about to be published. We studied this theory in 3 paraphilic samples. One of them, again, we studied men attracted to amputees. The second one was men attracted to non-human animals. The third was men attracted to morbidly obese persons. And by the way, the third group of men, they are normal weight themselves, but they have a paraphilic attraction for morbidly obese persons. And this is our theory, and I'll just really quickly talk about it. So all 3 groups, plus men with autogynephilia, start with an external sexual attraction. Autogynephilic men, their attraction is to women. men who like amputees, it's to amputees, etc. A subgroup of each of these developed an internalized sexual attraction. For autogynephiles, it's to the image of themselves as a woman. To men who like amputees, it would be to the image of themselves as an amputee. The middle step is erotic only. And then the final step, in a subgroup of people with the internalized sexual attraction, they become committed. They develop an erotic target identity inversion in which they actually desire to become, and often take steps to become, an instance of their internalized sexual attraction. All right, the final type of gender dysphoria I'll talk about and end with is rapid onset gender dysphoria. The figure on the left shows the referral rates for child and adolescent gender dysphoria at the Tavistock Center in London. And you can see from 2010 to 2018, it grew from 2 weekly referrals to 48 weekly referrals in less than 10 years. On the right, that shows the relative rates over about the same period of boys and girls. And you can see girls in red has grown much higher than boys, who also grew. Rapid onset gender dysphoria represents a current epidemic of a syndrome that didn't even exist before 2003. I used 2003 because that's when my book came out. But I would say I didn't even notice anything before 2010. The onset of this syndrome is during adolescence or young adulthood, and often comes with the sudden realization that one is transgender, and perhaps one's problems are due to the fact that one has been repressing one's transgender identity all along. And it's sudden or rapid also because this happens in youth without a history of obvious childhood gender dysphoria or even extreme gender nonconformity. This often happens in adolescent girls who liked dresses and dolls and may have had boyfriends and so on. This is most common in natal females with pre-existing issues, emotional problems. And there's a lot of evidence for social influence or contagion among these girls, peer-to-peer contagion. Here is my favorite ex-ROGD case, Helena Kirshner, from 2013 to 2021. In red, that's before she became gender dysphoric, and in the blue down at the bottom, that's after she desisted or after she detransitioned. And in the middle is her trans phase. There are several detransitioners like this, but if you ever have need of a very articulate and smart person to speak about this, talk to Helena. So I said there's evidence for social contagion. It's not the first time we've ever seen social contagion in girls and women. There we have witch accusers and witchcraft in Salem. That's Charcot with hysteric in Paris in the late 1800s. All the hysterics were women. And this is more recent, and these are two related phenomena. On the left is a woman who came to believe that she had multiple personality disorder with over 100 different personalities. She later successfully sued her psychiatrist, Bennett Braun, for several $1 million. The woman on the right helped send her father to jail based on recovered memories of sexual abuse and the mistaken memory, because I believe it is mistaken, that her father murdered her friend during childhood. The father went to prison. He's out now because the conviction was overturned. And this is more recent social contagion, perhaps. The T there, I suspect most of you, probably mostly male academics watching, don't know. That stands for Tumblr, which is quite the vector for social contagion among adolescent girls. The first academic article about rapid onset gender dysphoria was published by Lisa Lippman in 2018. And it received more or less the same treatment as our article has received. It was attacked mercilessly. PLOS One, the journal, required Littman to make corrections in the article that did not really change it much. One difference between her case and ours is that her article was not retracted. But she did lose her affiliation with Brown University, and who chose activists over her, to the detriment of both academic freedom and forwarding knowledge in this area. So there's our article, and that's what a retracted article looks like, at least for Springer Nature. I've never had an article retracted before. It's been an interesting experience. The article is still up on the website, same as it ever was. My understanding is that they will have the option to take it off if they want, but because we published it open access, we can republish our article as many times as we want, and we have current plans to republish it. And I will try to cite both versions. Springer, the publisher, keeps metrics about how often the article has been accessed and online attention. Well, the article has been accessed 100,000 times. I'm quite sure I've never had an article at this journal accessed nearly that many times. And this has happened in 3 months. And you can see online attention. This article is ranked 42nd of over 400 tracked articles in terms of online attention. You may have heard of the Streisand effect. That's what we got. So about this paper, first of all, the first author on this paper is Susanna Diaz. That's not her real name. I don't know her real name. Susanna is the parent of a child she believes has rapid onset gender dysphoria, and she requires anonymity to protect her family. I have met her in person, and in fact, that occasion is what sparked this. I saw Susanna give a presentation at a small meeting. I thought that her results were really interesting, and I encouraged her to write it up for publication. She's not an academic, I am, so we collaborated, and this article resulted. She recruited her parents from the website parentsofrogdkids.com. And the article reported on 1,655 children aged 11 to 21 with ROGD, or at least their parents believe that they have ROGD. 75% of the ROGD youth were female, as we would expect. There was a high rate of pre-existing emotional problems, especially depression and anxiety. You often hear about autism in this group, although these youth had probably an elevated rate of autism. It wasn't that high. Furthermore, I am not impressed personally with any research emphasizing autism because it's overdiagnosed and I don't even know what it means anymore. So back to our paper though, parents said that the emotional problems experienced by their children preceded gender dysphoria by 4 years, which is a long time. There was a high rate of social transition among the youth. About 2/3 of the females, less than half of that in the males, which is really interesting. Hormonal transmission was much rarer, only 7% of the youth had hormones. And parents said that after transition, the youth got much worse off. They got less happy, more angry, relationships with the parents got worse, and so on. Who transitioned? You know, not all the youth transitioned. Who did? Well, the ones who did transition tended to be those with the most emotional problems, which is not what we would want. And also those whose families had consulted a gender therapist or a gender specialist. And furthermore, the parents who had seen a gender specialist tended to feel that the specialist pressured them to transition their child. Okay, immediately after publication of our article, there were concerns, both methodological and ethical, and I ethical in scare quotes, methodological in scare quotes, I would say, in the sense that the methodological problems that we surely had, which was the way that we recruited our parents through this website, and obviously that's going to lead to a biased sample. We discussed the limitations of our study.
Sorry,
Hello? I'm almost done. Am I okay continuing? Okay. So again, we had activists who were pressuring the publisher and also the academic organization that I used to be a member of, the International Academy of Sex Research, who also pressured the publisher, and the retraction, eventuated. So the bottom line for ROGD, the concept, not our paper, I think there's substantial reason to believe this hypothesis. However, the research base is sparse. There's only been 2 major studies so far. And those of us who think it's a promising explanation believe that it's the most common cause of gender dysphoria right now. More research is needed, and urgently. This is a website for the organization where I'm a board member and collaborating with Lisa Littman and Ken Zucker on challenging them to think. And I think that philosophers, when they are doing the best kind of philosophy, where they actually are bothering to learn about a topic, art about it, they can be very useful. So I'm going to recommend. I apologize. Philosophers, and I'll do it quickly. First is a guy named Michael Humer, who has a Substack
called Fake News, NOUS.
I don't,
A
that
recent
is,
he wrote
that is from a podcast that
Elon Musk is better than you.
Yep.
Provocative title.
that is from a podcast that I did, and I don't know why it's playing right now. I don't think I'm playing it. So I am going to stop sharing. I had maybe one more slide, but I think that I conveyed what I needed to.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael, for the great talk. So now we will open for questions from the floor. I think, so feel free to raise your hands if you have questions. Let's see. Any questions?
I guess I can ask a question.
Yeah, Rick.
So I was wondering about, if I understood you correctly, 90% of the children who were wearing dresses, if they were boys, for example, when they were 4, 5, 6 years old, 90% of them, what was the word you said, desist, or they stop having this identification with the other gender. And I'm just wondering if there's good longitudinal studies on what their lives are like after that.
Yes, and I would say there have been several of these desistance studies, and the numbers obtained varied somewhat. I guess maybe I would say between 60 and 90, but the larger studies tend to have higher desistance rates. Yes, there have been studies about the longer term adjustment of youth who were seen at these clinics, some of whom did transition, others desisted. My sense from reading this, and one of these came from Ken Zucker's PhD student, Davida Singh. It's a very extensive dissertation, highly recommended. My memory, and I see in the audience some other people who may be able to correct me if I say anything wrong. My sense is that the desisters were, if anything, better adjusted than the persisters, the ones who did transition.
Mm-hmm. I have just one follow-up question, which is, I have seen a formulation of the dilemma that parents face when they have a child who feels they're dysphoric, gender dysphoric. And I've seen it formulated as you're faced with the choice between regret and suicide. That's the stark form in which it's, at least I've seen it put. In other words, the parents worrying that if they really encourage this and they go through some kind of hormone process or surgery, ultimately, they're going to regret it. And the other side of it is, if they don't, the risk of suicide goes up. And I'm wondering if there's any good evidence on either of those alternatives, whether in fact there is a high level of regret for people who go through the full process of transition, and whether or not there's evidence that parents who, I suppose, reacted the way people reacted 50 years ago end up having higher suicide rates.
The suicide threats is mainly a tactic by activists. The data really don't support the idea that transition is necessary to prevent suicide. Suicide is very hard to study because it's rare, but there have been some large studies, and transgender persons have a higher than expected rate of suicide. However, it doesn't seem to be related to whether they transitioned or not.
Mhm.
However, I do want to emphasize how much times have changed, because the data we have on outcomes are from the old days. These small, very careful studies over long terms. We're in the Wild West now, where people are they're going to adolescent girls are going to gender clinics and getting hormones the same day, because somebody tells their parents it's better to have a live son than a dead daughter. And I believe that these girls, many of them have rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is, and it's in some ways, it's an imaginary disorder. Don't get me wrong, it's a real syndrome, a real problem, but it's not genuine gender dysphoria. And there is no reason why girls with rapid onset gender dysphoria should be receiving medical transition.
Mhm. And how about on the regret side?
For girls with rapid onset gender dysphoria, it's very early. You know, these kinds of studies take a long time. Plus, now gender clinics are doing abysmal record keeping and research. The study that I am starting with Lisa Lippman and Ken Zucker will be a long-term study. We will be looking at what people do and how it affects their happiness. We'll have those data, but it's going to be a while.
Mhm. Thank you.
Deirdre? You have to unmute. You're muted, Deirdre. Deirdre, you are muted. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I transitioned in 1995, and I'm very happy. I'm 80 years old, so do the math. There's a problem with our discussion here, I think, which I'd like to hear you, Professor Bailey, to react to. The subject of this seminar is the threat to academic freedom. You, I think it's fair to say, have consistently portrayed yourself as a victim of attacks on academic freedom. And certainly Alice Drager portrays you as a Galileo, as a great scientist being unfairly persecuted. And the trouble is what we call in statistics a type 2 error. it's possible, don't you agree, that bad science, and I have to say that I as a scholar in science myself, think that a lot of what you do is bad science, but I don't think you're an evil person or anything. The right to academic freedom includes the right to be mistaken, to do science that's subsequently is shown to be wrong. But there's a danger, don't you think, of the repeated claim of poor Michael, and that it's standard, is it not, for this error to sometimes happen, and I hope it's a small percentage of the cases, but the error is that the person whose science is not being believed, and I emphasize to the audience here that Professor Bailey's science is not being believed by other gender scientists on the whole. It's too easy, isn't it, to claim, oh, they don't believe it because they're activists, which is among your favorite words. I'm an activist. You've accused me of being an activist. I'm not an activist. I'm an economist and historian primarily. So I want you to respond, and I want the other people to think about it, that it might be a case of a type 2 error here, that a bad scientist is defending himself by accusing his opponents of being activists against him.
I defend the science of autogynephilia and related phenomena by writing academic articles, of which I have written quite a few, and you would be welcome to read them and critique them. You would probably be able to have something published at Archives of Sexual Behavior, because the editor there enjoys raising discussion, but I've never encountered a critique of the theory written by you that I don't invited discussion. And I've engaged in plenty of debate with people.
Wait a second, dear. We were in Chicago together for many decades. Neither you nor this person, Alice Drager, ever attempted to engage me in real conversation about this hypothesis of autogynephilia. And I inform the other people here that some of your assertions on which you spend most of your time about your own theory are perfectly reasonable and maybe true. And some of them, especially the persistent emphasis in the case of trans women like me, that large numbers of us are sexually motivated, are untrue. But you didn't read my book, which is, you say I haven't made any contributions to this matter. Yes, I have. I wrote an biography about it. You haven't read that. And what's so irritating is that you haven't engaged with me or anyone else, as far as I know, who doesn't agree with you, and yet say, oh, I'm being persecuted. Look, I've been in many academic controversies myself about statistical significance, about economic history, about economics. I do a lot of stuff, some of it good, some of it bad, some of it good science, some bad science. And I've never gone around whining that I'm a victim of attacks on academic freedom. But you do.
I invite everybody here to read everything that Deirdre McCloskey has written about me and my book, but also read Alice Drager's book and her peer-reviewed article that preceded her book. If you come away from that believing that Deirdre McCloskey did not collaborate in trying to suppress ideas.
No, trying to expose bad science.
Okay.
The central issue, Michael, is between.
Trying to ruin my life.
No, I'm not trying to ruin your life.
Yeah,
I was trying to get the science
the
right.
idea that I would want to talk to you ever after you tried to ruin my life is quite.
I didn't try to ruin your life, Michael.
Okay,
I tried to object.
You did.
To your
and
science.
Everybody, you did. And
Jonathan has a question.
This is really not going to be productive.
Let's move on from
Okay, let me ask my
issues
question.
and let's focus on the topic.
Deirdre, I know very, very little about this, but I do know one thing. And what you said, I know for a fact is not true. It is not true because in that book, they specifically read your book and took paragraphs out of your book to demonstrate that their theory was true. That I know for a fact because I read the book. So it's not true to say that they didn't.
Which book are you talking about, dear? Are you talking about Michael's book?
I'm not an expert in this, but I know.
Which book are you talking about? If it was Michael's book, and that's what I was talking about.
I'm talking about your book.
No, look, let's get the book straight. Michael wrote the book, The Man Who Would Be Queen, which merges homosexuality. It's all about sex.
I'm not talking about that book. I'm not talking about that.
That's the one I'm talking about. So we're speaking at cross purposes. In that book, he hadn't confronted, read, considered the people who he was talking about. His sample was 6 Hispanic transgender prostitutes in a bar in Chicago. That was his sample.
Yeah, okay. But you said that they hadn't read your book. But I know that isn't true because in the I forgot her name, the person who wrote the other book about
Alice Drager. So you're talking about Galileo's middle finger.
Talking about Drager. He's talking about Drager. She refused. She claimed that she was going to send the manuscript to me for comment. And I invited her to do that, and she never did it.
In her book, she explicitly says that they read your book and that they took paragraphs out of your book to demonstrate. So it's not true